welcome everyone to our second virtual meeting of Performance and Finance Scrutiny Subcommittee. I hope you are all keeping safe and well. Before we begin proceedings, it would be good if we could all members could introduce themselves, please. I'm Councillor Kiran Ramchandani, Chair of this subcommittee.
My name is Pritesh Patel. I'm Vice Chair of the subcommittee.
It's Councillor Ghazanfali. I'm the member of this committee.
I'm Christine Robson. I'm not a member of this committee, but I'm here because of one of the reports which is being presented. I have the portfolio for children's services and education.
Hi, this is Councillor Nita Shirani. Sorry, my mic was muted previously. Councillor Nita Shirani, I'm the member of this committee.
I'm Councillor Simon Brown. I'm portfolio holder for adult services, so I'm here to cover the report on adult services complaints.
Councillor Dean Gilligan, reserve member of this committee.
Great, thank you all. Just to remind members present of the protocols of virtual meetings, which I'm sure you are well used to by now, but please remember to have your video on at all times, but to keep your microphone on mute unless you're speaking. In the case of technical problems, the meeting will adjourn until resolved. If a member loses connection, the meeting will adjourn until we reconnect. Pritesh, I hope that doesn't happen to you, but thank you for forewarning us just in case. This meeting is being video and audio recorded and will be available to watch and listen to on the website. We've had declarations of interest through and there haven't been any reported. Are there any members who would like to state any other declarations of interest? No. Okay. Moving on to the minutes. Can we approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of July 2020, please? Any comments on the minutes?
No comments approved.
Approved, yeah. Thank you. Agree.
Lovely. In which case we can approve those minutes. Next item, public questions. We haven't had any notified. Petitions, again, none notified, and no references from council and any other committees. So we will move on to our first item on the agenda, which is the Children and Adult Social Care Complaints, the annual reports. Can we start with the Children and Family Services complaints, please? Christine, do you want to say anything before we hand over to the officers to present, please?
Thank you, Kieran. Well, I mean, this is a good news story. It's always interesting that we do have a successful complaints procedure and that it's evidence of a healthy discussion between people who come to our services and the professionals who deliver them. And so I welcome the report and I trust that the committee will also find it a useful piece of information. And that's all I need to say, I think, really. We'll now hand over to the officers. Thank you, Kieran.
Great, thank you. And who's taking us through the first report this evening?
So good evening, councillors. I'm Paul Hewitt. I'm the Corporate Director for People Services. So the Complaint Service do cover the whole of the People Directorate. And in years gone by, we've had a single report for combining children and adults, but we didn't find that worked terribly well, and committee members didn't find that it worked terribly well because the issues are sometimes very different when it comes to the two different adults and children services. So we've split them this year, and I think it worked like that last year as well. A lot better. So we've got Peter here who can answer any detailed questions around the practice, but I think the complaint service is headed up currently by Usman, and he's the author of the report, and he's going to present both the children and adults, but we'll do them in sequence. And if there are any questions about the practice, then Peter is here with me to answer those questions. So I'm going to hand over to Osman now.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you everyone for your time here today as well. We do really appreciate an opportunity to discuss some of the matters raised in the report. I'll just go through some very brief, I know the reports are full of figures, but I think I'll just bring up some key ones which will help illustrate some of the key points in the report and some of the key messages in both of them as well. So within adults, it's stated in the report that there's around 7,700 requests within that financial year of 1920 for social care support. Around 200 contacts of those came through to the complaint service to have some form of involvement, but only around 31 of those actually formed formal complaints. The vast majority of them were representations. And this is because we've recognized, working over the years with adult social care, that a lot of the issues don't necessarily come from service quality. It's just that adult social care, by its very nature, it's a very challenging and very complex point of people's lives when they come across it within families. There's a lot of complicated charging elements. There's different and difficult decisions to make for families. So what we've done as a complaint service is try to work with the services to make them understand that as soon as an issue comes up, it shouldn't necessarily be thought of as a formal complaint, but a family having an issue or a problem, and we should really have a resolution-focused understanding of this. Similarly, within children's, we had around 4,000 children who came into contact with social care, and around 156 of these became transactions within the complaint service. Around 44 of those were formal complaints, and again, the vast majority of those were representations. We're really working with the service there to, it can become quite easy to become quite service focused and really understand that while it is a very important statutory duty that all the social workers and social services are doing, that sometimes to put yourselves in the shoes of what the family might be going through, there can be stress and distress that can be caused just by the involvement of social care because of the very difficult nature of the work that they do. So again, we've worked very closely with the services to understand that it may not necessarily always be the best route to go down a formal complaint. It can be quite cold to just receive letters about very difficult and emotional issues. So having open and transparent discussion with services to informally resolve things, to have meetings or phone conversations, or to approach us before it even becomes a complaint, because it's all about restoring trust in the service as well. It's not just about solving an immediate issue. It's about working with the service in a long-term basis so that everyone can work together towards those really important goals of protecting the vulnerable. So I hope those messages came across in both of those reports. And we'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Osman. Before we go on to questions, Simon, do you want to say anything for the adults part of the report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think following on from what Osman was saying, I think the figures in the report really speak for themselves, actually. And it's obvious that we have an ethos of problem solving here in the services, both children's and adults. We try and we do address issues quickly, and we attempt to sort things out just as fast as we can do, as fast as possible. And as the figures go on to show, only a tiny number of complaints make it in adults to a formal stage 2 or go through to the Ombudsman. But I think as well as a culture of resolving problems, we also make sure that we learn the lessons where we have made a mistake, so that we can learn from it and we don't repeat the same mistake a second time, and that's just as important. So I am really, as portfolio holder, I'm really proud of Osmond and the team in adults and the children's as well, for the work they do supporting our residents in, as Osmond has said, what can be a really challenging and complex situation. And as you heard, our team try and stand in the shoes of the residents and see it from their point of view and understand how important it is to try to take action and resolve things just as quickly as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. Right, moving on to questions. We'll start with Dean, then Gazanfer, then Pritesh. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. This is regarding the complaints from the children's. The complaints from the Caribbean community seem to be a bit higher than that of other ethnic groups. Is this proportionate to the demographics of our clients?
Hi.
Sure. Do you want to?
No worries. What I would say is, if you look at the overall figures, there are some ethnicity breakdown figures at the beginning of the report, which does break down the overall from the several thousand contacts we were referring to. What I would say is the number of complaints that we actually receive at a formal level are quite frankly so small that I wouldn't say it's a representation issue. However, what we do ensure is that when we do receive complaints from certain members of the community, and if any issues come up, where any issues of diversity or culture is ever brought up in a complaint, we make sure that those individual cases are looked at on a case-by-case basis, and we ensure that any feedback is received, particularly again, from families going through a very sensitive and difficult time. There are some communities where they say certain sensitivities have to be taken into account, and we do try and ensure that on a case-by-case basis. So I hope that answers that question. But in terms of the overall numbers, because the formal complaints are so low, I wouldn't necessarily, we've not necessarily seen enough data to say that that's a representation issue. Thank you.
Gazanfer.
Thank you, Swan. I'm not as experienced as my colleague like Councillor Brown or Councillor Robson. I just need a bit of more elaboration on looked after CLA, if you can just elaborate a bit further. And my second question is, what kind of complaints in majority you get? Thank you.
Sure. If it's okay, Councillor Ali, I'll go with the second part of the question first, because I think that might be a little bit more detailed. To be honest with you, the majority of the complaints we get, both in, and I hope the reason breakdown in the reports helps as well, but in my experience and what I've seen from working with the services, it's often an issue of perception and communication. So when social workers will go in, whether it's from adults or children's, they'll often have to be discussing they'll be referring to certain assessments, and they may say Section 17 assessment, Section 47, Care Act. So families, we feel, tend to hear these very formal things, and they suddenly become very hesitant, especially with some of the very invasive questions that need to be asked, especially in the case of safeguarding, both in adults and children's. When you have to ask very difficult questions, parents and family members often feel that they are not necessarily on the same page and on the same side as what social care, what they're trying to do. So this often comes from a misperception, and this is why sometimes actually having the complaint service involved, sometimes we will communicate to the citizen, and they find that having someone outside of the service communicate the same message helps them understand it a little bit better, because it's not that same person coming into their home. So we often find that a big issue is about the perception of social care and what they're actually trying to do for families. Going to the first part of your question, sorry, with children looked after, it can be a range of issues. First of all, we understand that children's services, they have a corporate responsibility for children that they've taken in under their care. But those are normally very practical issues. We find young people often have very good relationships with their social workers, and it's normally larger decisions, such as where they want to go for a placement and whether they're close to their friends. So young people often bring up very practical and very decisions where they feel will impact their life that the social worker may not necessarily have full discretion over. So that's what we normally see from the children looked after point of view. Thank you.
Peter, did you want to come in on that point?
Yes, particularly the former point, Councillor Ali. So over the years, sort of for children's, the main range of complaints tend to be when parents are splitting up, divorcing. We do get lots of very tricky complaints coming in where often one party thinks that social care is favouring the other. Clearly that doesn't take place. And of course, the whole nature of children possibly being taken into care, often not, but it's just the journey that social workers need to take the parents or the families on to avoid that situation. So often it's a kind of preemptive strike by the family members. And I think that's where the complaints team are very strong. As Usman mentioned, there are lots of meetings that the team doesn't shy away from setting up meetings with social workers, with team managers, heads of service, and sometimes even directors to explain in detail to the family what's going on. And I think that's one of the strengths of the team. But often they are involved in complex cases. Warring parents is often a term being used. Without those, we would have a far fewer number of complaints coming through children's. Thank you.
Yep. Can just ask Peter, just a bit further on. I mean, do you try your best to reconcile, as you mentioned, between divorce coming on, or there's a argument with husband and wife, mother and father? Do you try your best to reconcile if there are any differences to safeguard the children's?
Indeed, I mean, that's the reconciliation of relationships. It isn't necessarily a priority or really a role for the complaints team, but it's really one of education with a small e, and informing them of the process. The process is often, the fear of the unknown. It's a process they haven't been through before, and that's where the team will concentrate. It's the education, reassuring people as well, and often just to engage with the social workers, let them do their job. Thank you.
Peter Tully, did you want to come in on that point as well?
Yes, good evening. I'm Peter Tully. I'm the Division Director for Children and Young People Services. Just make a couple of points really. In terms of the complaints of children generally, we do see it as a very healthy thing to have complaints. That is an opportunity for children, for our parents and the children families we work with to challenge us on some of our practice, and our complaints team give us an independent way of trying to manage that. So I think that is so I think we need to see it in a positive light, and what our complaints colleagues help us do and help the families do is really focus on the issues, because sometimes there's a feeling of a grievance, but it's actually the team help really try and focus on what is that feeling about and what and help to really focus down on what the issues are, and they help do that from us, and they're distant from the actual casework of the family, so that is really helpful. And their skills in doing that is why we have most of cases are resolved at an early stage, and that's a really useful part of the service, and it really helps families, because often when we're working in complex issues of child protection and safeguarding, you can get into a very polarised situation because you're trying to sort of challenge families about some of their parenting and some really sort of sensitive issues, and being able to sort of the complaints team help us really focus on that. And in terms of looked after children, I think it's also very healthy that as corporate parents we allow our looked after children to challenge us on some of our parenting, and we've got systems in place which give them some independent challenge on that, and they can go outside of the casework to ask some specific questions. So as the sort of Division Director of Children and Families, I'm quite content with the report, and I'm quite satisfied with the complaints and challenge that's happening, and I think we're managing it in quite a fair and transparent way. And I think it's also very good that you would have seen all the compliments in there as well, and I know we don't want to sort of be too self-congratulatory, but there are a lot of positive comments and feedback around our social work practice in the report as well, so I'm sure you would have noted.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's understood. You know, it's very good report. Thank you.
Thank you, Pritesh.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Osman, for presenting the report to me. I think it's an excellent report. It's very well summarised, and you know the information contained within is very easy to understand, but also it's very important for us to understand, you know, the scale of the issue. And I think you all have done a very good job, and I'm really grateful for that. Just one question that follows from reading the report is that, you know, obviously we're in the midst of a pandemic. How long that might continue, we don't know. And communication is a very important part of the role you guys play, you know, with people who are affected. And I was wondering what impact that had on yourselves and your teams, and how you are sort of embarking on addressing that challenge, if it were. So I just wanted to understand what your views were on that and what you're doing about it.
So thank you, Councillor. I really appreciate the comments. You're absolutely right. The pandemic has definitely been a challenge for all council services involved. What we wanted to ensure is, so our service has primarily been a service where we through one of many means, and the majority of that has thankfully mostly been electronic mail. We received the vast majority of our contact via electronic mail. And for those occasions where sometimes even if out of hours calls come in or etc., Access Harrow, they know our team very well, so we often get contacts through to them. If someone can't reach us in the usual way, we get letters scanned in from the local authority as well if people are still writing in. So we're ensuring that receiving all of those contacts. What we're also ensuring is, as soon as we had the IT capability with Teams, I can assure you that on pretty much a daily basis, I'm in contact with several different teams across services, not just about complaints that have actually come about, but about issues which may actually turn into those complaints, because we're really still trying to feed, regardless of the pandemic happening, we're still trying to feed that point in that social workers are actually, they're very professionally qualified, and they're the ones who know the cases inside out. They know the cases really well. So we want them to feel empowered to resolve things, so that even at this very difficult time, people don't need to go through additional difficulties or additional hurdles when more than ever, they may not have the time or the energy to do that. So we're trying to ensure that we stay on the forefront of all the services involved, with Teams and other methods that we have available. We're still setting up complaints meetings actually over Teams, so we're ensuring that's happening. And we'll also be providing training, additional training soon for all the services, for all the lessons that we learned over the last year and two, so that they can keep up to date with all the lessons we're learning, and they can keep providing that service despite the pandemic happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Usman. That was very helpful.
Any other questions on either report, the children's or adults? Any further comments? No? In which case, can I just say a big thank you to all the officers involved in pulling together this report. It's always one of the both of them, the most comprehensive reports that come to this subcommittee, and yeah, very grateful for all the work that you put into not just the reports, but actually dealing with the service as well. You guys are doing an absolutely fantastic job, so thank you very much. Simon and Christine.
Very good. Thank you.
Simon and Christine, you're very welcome to stay for the financial items on the agenda, but I suspect you might want your evening back. So yes, officers and members not involved in the finance reports, feel free to leave and enjoy the rest of your evenings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good evening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So moving on to our financial reports for the evening. Councillor Swirsky is going to join us in a few minutes. He can't stay for the full meeting, but we will be able to ask him some questions. But firstly, I'll hand over to Dawn. Dawn, if you can take us through the first of the reports, the revenue and capital monitoring, please, and we'll go to questions after that.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Dawn Calvert, I'm the Council's Director of Finance and Assurance. The first report that you have got today is the Council's Revenue and Capital Monitoring Report for the current financial year, and this is the quarter two, so as the period is the end of September. I'll just give a very few key highlights and then really open the report up to questions. So this is the second time the revenue financial reporting has come to both Cabinet and this committee. What it shows us at quarter two is the position has got a little bit better from quarter one. The report is very long because what we are doing this year is we are splitting the financial performance between that which is related to the business as usual budget and that which is related to COVID expenditure, so that we can keep track of the two. So what we show is that quarter one we were forecasting an overspend of just over 1.5 million between the two. What we are now saying is that overspend is reduced to just over £500,000. It is acknowledged that we have received a further tranche of COVID funding to help us with our COVID related pressures, which is as it should be, but we have got some additional pressures around waste management and facilities management that we are reflecting in the numbers. It's very important that we understand that this report was prepared as at the end of September, so it doesn't include the impacts of the current lockdown, of the recent lockdown that we've been in and the current tier arrangement that we're in. So it doesn't reflect both the expenditure that's going to be incurred in respect of that period or the additional funding that we're getting either from the government. That it will be reflected in the next reporting to Cabinet and to this committee, which will be February. The report also includes a summary of COVID, so people are very aware of what we are reporting to MHDLG and what we are receiving with the council. And the report concludes with the performance against the capital programme. What we are saying is that we've got a current forecast spend against the capital programme in this year of 44%. We accept that that is low. The report does describe that obviously a number of schemes have been paused because of COVID. I think that's understandable, but a significant part of the slippage is relating to one scheme, and that is the money that we have in the capital programme for commercial investment properties. But as we can see from the budget report and the capital programme report later on, that is actually being removed. It's been removed from the capital programme for next year. So that's really sort of the key highlights of the report. It's probably best, Chair, if I just ask if any members have any questions.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll open it up to questions. Pritesh.
Chair, I have quite a few questions on this particular report because I feel that a lot of the issues are probably current, and also some of the issues may sort of fall into the later documents that Dawn will present to us. But I don't know how you want to address it, but do you want the whole lot of reports sort of presented first, or take the questions afterwards, or you want to go through it?
If possible, I'd like the questions on this specific report, and then we'll go through each report one by one. I think the questions will be somewhat different.
I've got a few questions. Would that be a problem?
No, the floor is yours, Pritesh.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think my first question is really just for some clarification, if I may, Dawn. The table 3 that you've got there on page 7. I'm a little bit puzzled by the figures there at the bottom on the bottom table, where you've got commissioning and commercial services and environmental and culture, and you've got, I think there might be an error or something, but it needs to be visited. You've got 9512 and 3923 in the last column, total quarter 2 including COVID impact. Now that doesn't seem to match what you have in Appendix 1 of the report, and I was wondering if you can clarify which is the correct figures that we should be looking at, if that is the case.
Okay. Okay. What I'll do is Sharon's on the call as well. If I have Sharon just have a look at that, and if we cover your current questions, is that okay? And then if we have,
that's fine.
Okay. Sharon, can you have a look at that, please?
Can you just repeat the tables that you were referencing so I can just quickly?
Yeah, it's table 3 on page 7.
Yeah.
It's the second table.
Okay.
Which is the and it's the last sort of column. Total quarter 2 including COVID-19 impact.
Yeah.
And I believe the first two rows that you have there, that figure does not seem to match what is in the actual summary of 2021 revenue budget forecast, Appendix 1.
Okay.
So I just wanted to make sure that, you know, those are accurate, and if there is a discrepancy, then that's corrected.
Okay. I'll have a look at that.
The second question I had is with respect to the funding, that emergency funding that we provided to certain organizations. And I note on page 10, you mentioned the sports and leisure, a grant of 1.4 million was provided to everyone active. Now, everyone active is basically a private organization. It's not really a charity in that sense. So my question is, why are we providing them with a grant? And you know, what's the reasoning behind that?
So everyone active are receiving, it's actually classed as a charity for NNDR purposes. What they are doing is, due to the pandemic, there's two arrangements on everyone active. They are due to pay under their contractual arrangements. They are due to pay as a management fee arrangement per annum, which they are unable to do at the moment. So that management fee is not being received by the council, and therefore the council is claiming that back from its emergency funding, and that is entitled to do, and that is what is being done across London and nationally. So we are entitled to do that because there is a recognition that obviously the leisure industry has been very badly affected. What everyone active is also doing is we are looking at where they are struggling in terms of their profit and loss, and in terms of providing some support for that. Now, I do appreciate what you say about it's a profit-making company, but we do have to look at this in light of government support is being provided for that, and we need to look at maintaining those leisure support facilities, helping those providers get through this pandemic with the funding we're receiving to ensure they can continue afterwards. And I can see that Adam has his hand up on this question.
Yes, I'm sorry, Chair, that I was late and I couldn't tell. Just on the specific question, I mean, obviously there are extreme circumstances at the moment in terms of leisure. Obviously, massive fall in the number of people who are attending the centre, and therefore revenues going down. And you know, essentially, the choice we're faced is: do we accept that the leisure contract either falls through, closing the leisure centre, you know, potentially having to take it in house with significant, huge additional costs potentially around that, or do we come to an arrangement? And we have come to an arrangement like many other London boroughs have done, but it's one based on an open book approach. So that means that we are not covering, any kind of profit for the company. It's really we are literally covering their ability to sustain the contract as is, until obviously we're in a position where people can go back and use the facilities.
Sure, I do appreciate that, and I'm just wondering, how this will be. I mean, obviously, there's lots of other different types of organisations involved in the leisure sports facility industry. And, typically you're looking at people like the gym owners. If they look at something like this, what's our response to them? And why aren't they getting that kind of money as support?
I think in that particular, scenario, the Harrow Leisure Centre is obviously the key council leisure facility. It's not the only council leisure facility, and obviously we have to come with arrangements in. Bannister Sports Centre, Hatton Swimming Pool, there's a number of others. We've come with different arrangements in those. But obviously we have a different responsibility towards our own leisure facilities that we ultimately contract out versus fundamentally private facilities. Obviously, we think the government should be doing more to support those businesses, and where possible through our grants, we're doing the same.
Thank you very much, Adam. If I move on to the third question. It's regarding the cost pressure on the children's services that is forecasted as a result of COVID. And, you mentioned that the under 18s home to school transport grant of 500k will no longer be provided by TfL. I'm just wondering, what are the plans for that particular service provision as we go on?
Can I just ask what paragraph you're referring to, Councillor? Sorry, I've got.
2.23. Apologies, and it's on page 14.
Right. Do you want me to answer this, Adam?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So on TfL, At the moment, sorry, hold on. At the moment, this we think that this might change. At the moment, TfL has said that it has suspended its free travel for the under 18-year-olds, and so what we have got in our forecast is that we have made the assumption in this forecast that that TfL will no longer provide that grant for the under 18. Now, this is a moving feast at the moment in terms of this could very likely change in preparation for going forward, where it may that subsidy may not be removed for next year. So if we so I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound vague, but this is very much a moving feast in terms of the deal that's been happening with TfL. So when we've done the budget report, we have not assumed that grant will be removed. So I think that because this was prepared right back in September, at the moment the current thinking is that grant will not be removed. Therefore, our under 18s transport, the full cost provision will not be transferred over to the borough.
And when are we likely to see a confirmation whether that grant is removed or not removed?
We are due to get the settlement this week. Whether something will be confirmed this week. So I'm hoping that we will get our indicative financial settlement this week. So I'm hoping that something will be confirmed in that settlement.
Thank you, Dawn. If I move on just to the dedicated school grants, which is just a little bit below that page.
Yeah.
I note that we've had a projected overspend in the high needs block, and now we're looking at a figure at the end of March next year of 6.1 million. And the question really is, what is the recovery plan to recover that total deficit? And when will it be available for review?
Shall I start off, Adam? So we do have a recovery plan in terms of, the high needs block we're in a funny position on the high needs block in that there is a recovery plan, but the reality is that the recovery plan will not cover the cost pressures that we are incurring on the high needs block. There has been a significant increase in the high needs block, partly because the rules were changed about the age limit in which the authority has to provide responsibility. It was increased up to under 25 years old, but we receive no funding for that. So the authority does prepare a recovery plan now, and I've seen that recovery plan. So it does say that they can get the pressure against the high needs block down a little bit, but the reality is that because we have a statutory responsibility to cover transport for certain children based on a criteria in the age limit, we will never be able to get. We just cannot provide that within the budget that we've got. This is not an issue that is just for Harrow. This is an issue that is across the council and across the country and across London. What we have now, and I think this is getting to be a problem because we have a deficit held outside our accounts, and for some authorities this is getting very, very significant for us. Now, what we were informed by MHCLG as part of the spending review that came out at the end of November is we were told that this is a DFE issue, and we were told that the DFE is now going round those authorities to see what can be done to tackle the issue. And it's looking at those authorities that are hardest hit, the ones with the most significant level of pressures against the high needs block. This is an issue that the DFE is going to have to sort out, because we cannot just not meet the criteria for SEN transport and not provide transport to those children up to 25 years. So this is an issue that DFE know they're going to have to get sorted out and need to sort out quickly, because it is a rapidly increasing pressure.
So any ideas when we're likely to sort of approach DFE to try and get this resolved? Or there have been
many. There is much lobbying and much approaches to DFE about this. So this is a recognised problem that has been ongoing for some time. There have been much tussle about how it should be accounted for, in terms of, do we account for it within the revenue account, outside of the revenue account? Some of the challenges is previously on the DSG, there was flexibility for the organisation to move money between the various blocks of the DSG to accommodate the needs of the borough, because obviously different boroughs have different needs. That's now been stopped by DFE. Now all that we understand is that DFE are coming round the various boroughs now to understand the position and what can be done about it. But it is there is much lobbying going on about this, and it's an issue that we all know needs to be sorted.
Okay, thanks for that, Dawn. Okay, if I just move on a little bit more, regard to section 2.29, the central contingency that you stated there of 1.248 million is forecast as being spent at this point in the year, and so there is no variance. My question for this is the central contingency, what's the difference between that contingency and the earmark reserves?
The central the earmark reserves are one-off pots of money that are held on the balance sheet for specific or general purposes. The contingency, what we call the contingency for unforeseen items, of £1.2 million, that is a ongoing reserve in our revenue budget, so it's there every year. So whereas a reserve balance is one-off, once it's spent, it's spent. This is amount of money that we have provided in our budget every year. So if we spend it this year, we still, it's spent in this year, but the budget still exists for next year. We are forecasting that it's going to be spent at the moment because what we, as I explained earlier, what we don't have built into this budget is all the additional pressures as a result of the current lockdown. So what we will do is, as we approach Q3, we'll see whether that is still valid, that contingency will not be spent. We are trying to keep a very robust grip on the revenue budget for this year, particularly the business as usual budget, because we are trying wherever possible to not apply any reserves to this year budget to help us to carry them forward, to help us out with our pressures going forward. So there will be a push on not using this contingency unless, for example, something comes in that puts our statutory services at risk.
And that contingency can be used in any sort of area, if you like. Is that okay?
Yes. This is not earmarked for any specific purpose. It's a general contingency against the entirety of the revenue account.
Okay. Question 6 on page 16, 2.3.6. We've got the savings tracker there, 2021, and we've looked at we've only met 45% basically, according to a statement on further down of our expected savings. Now, what confidence do we have that all our saving targets will be met at the year end as we go along? Because 45% halfway through the year seems to be there, but what do you think at the moment, and how we're looking for the year end?
Well, what we're forecasting at the minute, we're being very open and transparent, and we're saying that we forecast that by the end of the year, 44% of the savings will be achieved by year end. And what the report states is that, I think it's, to be fair, it was a very, very challenging savings target in our budget this year. I think what we are saying in the report, though, is there are some key savings in there that is contributing to that figure. So we've explained 4 of those areas. So as I was saying, that a big chunk of that non-achievement relates to 4 very specific areas. We've talked about one of them already tonight. We've got the SEN transport. That is proving, very challenging in light of having to transport. We have a very set criteria for transport. We have an age requirement on them, and we are being very transparent in that there is a very challenging income target against the depot, which will not be achieved, and we are actually proposing to remove that for next year. So at the moment, I think that we are predicting 44% achievement at year end, and so that is what we are progressing at this year end, and we will do everything we can to make that better by year end, but that is what we're forecasting at the moment.
And just to add on that, I think we've had a history of being very high on the percentage of the savings that we've managed to achieve in the past, and what we're seeing now, both in terms of the absolute size of savings that you can actually see in the table, and we come on to that in the budget as well, but also the achievement is just how hard it is now to eke out those incremental savings. We're just year 10 now of austerity, and it's just not as straightforward. So we push the directors as hard as possible, budget setting, to come forward with savings. We've got to accept now that those are becoming really, really quite challenging. We've got to, and we can recognise that directors have come forward to offer some savings. There are some risks that they don't achieve them, and obviously we have to do our best to make sure that does happen. But we also want people to feel that they are able to come forward with things that they are guaranteed to be able to achieve.
Sure. Thank you, Adam. If I move on further down to page 17, housing revenue account. Now, one of the comments that you've said is the pressures on the housing revenue account is entirely due to more or less COVID-19. Now, my question to you is, there have been a significant number of slippages in your regeneration program, where developments that were supposed to happen, that were supposed to contribute to the revenue account, haven't happened. So, what impact has that had? I mean, there must have been some impact to the revenue account because of that, and the number of slippages that we've experienced over the year.
I think it's quite hard to link. The HRA is a very separate account, and it's a separate account that deals with the social housing, basically the council housing. So it's a very separate account. Like, it's quite difficult to link it to regeneration. So this is just saying that the council housing stock that the council has, both the rental income and the expenditure related to those stock, is managed within the HRA. What we are acknowledging is that during this year we have had pressures on the HRA as a result of COVID. That is meaning that its year-end position is coming out slightly different to what they forecast it to be. I think what we wouldn't do, the regeneration schemes that you're taught with. And so was it? Sorry, can I just clarify, please, Councillor Pell? When you were saying linked to other schemes, what other schemes were you referring to, and the impact on the HRA?
Simply because the regeneration program had a number of schemes which were related to sort of council housing that did happen. And we were relying on some of that revenue to come in, and which would have been realised.
The revenue, thank you. The revenue that would have come in from the regeneration schemes wouldn't have impacted on the HRA account, because they were taught that the regeneration schemes were primarily linked to PRS and affordable, which at the moment would not have linked on the HRA account. What the HRA account is progressing with is its Buildings Homes for the Future programme, where it's got its new council housing come on stream. What we're just acknowledging in this report is obviously with the pandemic, we have had additional housing costs and some loss of income, and that is impacting on the HRA for those properties contained within the HRA.
Thank you, Dawn. If I move on to 2.48, page 19, regarding incomes and grants. Thank you for giving me early visibility of this document. And I noted that, in your comments to me, you said that you need to verify the NNDR figure. It's been markedly reduced. So can you just give us an explanation of why it's been reduced from 49 million to now about 8.7 million?
So the NNDR figure relates to the rate relief that we have.
Sorry, 26 million. I apologise.
Yeah, sorry, no. In terms of the specific reason, I may just have to come back to you after the meeting, if that's okay. This figure is the NNDR relief that has been granted, and we are getting Section 31 grant back for. I have to confess, I'm just wondering whether we had picked up other things in terms of the 26 million figure that I showed you prior to the committee report. So if it's okay with yourself, I'll just get you a proper explanation. But this figure is correct, and I think one of the disadvantages of sharing it with you early is we've probably picked up other things and we've reduced it down to the actual level in this report.
Okay, so I am to assume that we've got 94.4 million in terms of receipts from grants and income. Now, why is this not reflected in any way in our revenue budget? Because we show the 18 million or whatever it was for the emergency funding, but yet we're not showing all this income anywhere on that sheet. So what's the reason for that?
I think what this table shows is the funding that the authority is being provided for. What we are showing in the revenue account now is the money that we can specifically account for against our general revenue, against our revenue expenditure and income. So if I go through a few categories and explain to you. So for example, let's pick the figure of the big figure of £49 million to businesses. That is money that we have literally received in, but we have had to passport out to organisations outside of the council. So what we can't do is we cannot use any of that funding to offset the pressures that the council has faced. So in the revenue account, in our expenditure, we are showing all those pressures of additional expenditure we've had to incur and the income that we've lost, and we can apply certain elements of the funding that we've received against those pressures. There are some pressures where the money comes in to the authority, but it is being passported straight out, so we can't claim it against expenditure that we've incurred. So, for example, with the business grants, we have received that money in, so we've received £49 million in. We've spent so much of that money, which has gone straight out to other, third parties, and we have the balance of the funding to pay back on our balance sheet. If I pick up on another one, for example, reopening of the High Street Fund, we have got that money into our account, but it has been paid out to high street businesses to help them manage the pandemic. So there's some of this funding that we can use directly to offset the pressures and the income loss that we've got in our revenue account, but some of the money comes in and we have to pass it. We passport it straight out to other organisations. Hence why it isn't shown as specific lines in the monitoring.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I think I've got a couple more questions on the capital programme part of that document. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to continue for this. I do appreciate it. Just under the resources section, 3.30, page 21, what lessons have we learned in light of the failure in the commercial property investment strategy? Because 94 million to take out of that commercial strategy that we have, which is supposed to bring a significant amount of revenue to us, has basically not happened. And that's catastrophic failure on our part. And I'm just wondering what we've learned out of it and whether we're going to be doing it again or not.
So can I come back on this one? Is okay. So I think there's a few things to consider. I mean, the first thing is, why did we put originally £100 million into the capital programme for commercial property investments? The reason we did that is because in July 2019, we developed a 2-year budget strategy to try and attack the fundamental structural budget gap this council has been facing for a long time. You've seen that in their budgets every year. We've just about managed to close the gap, but we're pushing out the structural gap further into the future. So what can we actually do? And we came up with a variety of measures, including transformation and other measures. But one of those key measures was, well, we could look to see whether we could use our ability to invest to try and fundamentally close that structural gap. But what we said at the time, July 2019, was we know that this is not a risk-free option. This is complicated. Spending £100 million of taxpayer money, we've got to go into this very seriously. It's a very strong idea. It's a very strong contender. But we always said we were going to seek advice before we developed a whole approach to using that 100 million. We were able to use some of it. That's why it's gone down. We're not taking 100 million now. We're taking 94 million out. But actually, by the time that we got to the point of saying, well, should we be progressing at a much faster pace with that strategy? We were already in an environment with the pandemic where it was totally not viable to be looking to make big investments as a council. That would have been completely wrong to proceed with that. So we said, draw a line under that. That's no longer a viable strategy. We take that. We're not going to spend £94 million. We don't think it's prudent. And we're going to take that out of the budget and obviously take out the associated savings, and instead we'll have to do other measures. That whole approach was only developed because of the structural underfunding the local government now faces. But of course, that strategy didn't work out. That's absolutely fine. We didn't spend the money. We didn't lose any taxpayer money, and it was the right thing to do. So I think that's of course makes our capital programme look like we haven't spent very much this year, but it's rather that than spend money that we shouldn't do.
Can I just add as well, Councillor Swirsky, that the 6 or 7 commercial investments that we have actually made, we have achieved the income returns that we set out to achieve, and that money is still coming into the budget. And I think that's important to understand. The 6 or so that we've done, we are getting the income we anticipated as a contribution to the budget.
I mean, my general sort of comment on that is, you keep mentioning the significant budget gap year after year, and yet miraculously, the year following, we managed to close that budget gap to near nil. And then that budget gap is moved on. And from what I've noticed in some of the monitoring reports is that, we have for the past 3 years been underspending significantly, and in many cases slipping. So we're not spending the budget that we've already got, and then we're requesting more money from elsewhere. This cannot be right. And I know this is my pet issue with the way we do the finance, but it's certainly something that needs to be looked at.
So
that was
two things on that, Pascal, because it's a very important point that you make. The one is we always talk about capital, but there is an approach to the way that we budget for capital. It typically means that we will never spend the full amount because it's quite hard to put more capital into the budget. So we rather put a bit more into the budget than have a very tight process to release that, and rather make sure that we don't spend money on things that aren't right, but rather than having to go back to full council every time we want to make an investment. So that's our approach to capital. But I agree that does lead to this position of slipping money to the future. I think the miraculous disappearance of the budget gap every year is not so miraculous when you think of the fact that the Chancellor every year for the last several years has stood up at budget time and said, by the way, we're going to give councils 1 year funding for X and 1 year funding for Y. And as long as the government refuses to lay out a medium-term, long-term strategy for local government finance, we will be in exactly the same position every single year, and this conversation will continue.
Because the government knows that if they give you any more money, you'll misspend it. That's the reason why they're being careful with it. Anyway, moving on. Question 11, and a final question on this particular document, you're pleased to hear. It is on page 23 with respect to Vernon Lodge. And my question is, if the development of Vernon Lodge is to be no longer progressed, why are we slipping 14.177 million into 2021-22 budget? And does that imply that the project is still going to go ahead, albeit a revised form or format?
Yes, I think that no longer progressed, and Dawn can correct me, but no longer progressed in the original version. Yeah. So there are absolutely those projects, both projects around the Vernon Lodge and the Promotion Centre, still very much on the agenda. But we had to have a full review of the business case, which is always something that we needed to do. Obviously, capacity constraints and so on, and we'll be in a position to move forward with that in the future, but in a different format.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience in answering all my questions. Please, Chair, move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to switch the agenda a little bit because I know we haven't got Adam with us for very long. So I'd like to go to the budget. Adam, would you like to do some introductory remarks on the budget? And then I think we'll take some political questions to you before we go to more technical questions for Dawn, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for indulging me, and apologies for my difficult scheduling tonight, standing between two emergency meetings at the moment. So in terms of the budget report, I know the committee won't have had a huge chance to review it, and obviously we'll have full discussion on Thursday. I'm sure we'll have more chances with Scrutiny to look at the budget in the near future. I think there's a couple of things to say. I mean, firstly, clearly we remain in a very, very difficult funding environment. We went into in the February budget, we were projecting a £22 million budget gap over the following 2 years, 2021 to 2023. And obviously we had all kinds of plans to try and close that £22 million gap. Instead, we had the pandemic and everything went in absolutely the wrong direction. And Councillor Patel, asked some very forensic questions about the grants that we've received. But the reality is that, we've got a £36 million impact of COVID, and we've only had roughly half of that has been accounted for by central government grants, leaving, half of it to be filled by the council. And so, we remain in a very, very challenging environment. That's the first point. The second point is that it's also an incredibly uncertain environment. And we had a situation where a 3-year spending review turned into a 1-year spending review, the budget was cancelled, and the local government finance settlement, as is seemingly traditional, comes along after the budget the draft budget is already proposed to cabinet, which means that there is still major uncertainties about exactly what our funding position will be for next year. Lay it onto the policy environment uncertainties. We have all the uncertainties around the COVID position. We have uncertainties around will there be more emergency funding coming from government, but also some of the major impacts we've had, council tax on business rates, and some of our other income lines. Will they perpetuate in 21, 22 or not, or to what degree? And those things, unfortunately matter to the tune of millions of pounds here or there. So I think we were faced with a choice. Clearly, the whole set of things that we've put in place in the budget outlined with them to try and fill the budget gap. Everything from being very tight on directorate spending to looking at some non-strategic asset disposals. But aside from those things that we absolutely, could do and would plow ahead with in any scenario, we had the decision to take on whether we proactively make a whole series of incredibly painful frontline service cuts in the middle of the pandemic, or whether we say, actually, we think that there are some upside scenarios in the future if the pandemic gets better with the vaccines, if the government releases some more emergency funding, if there might be some fixes to social care, the local government finance, and so on. Therefore, let's not make any drastic frontline cuts today. Rather, let's make sure that we have the reserves in place to withstand the worst case scenario. And actually, what we've ended up doing is setting a budget that does use a pot of reserves against the budget gap. But actually, that pot of reserves is only consists of reserves that were expressly built up to help us with budget gaps. So none of the general reserves, none of the key earmark reserves, simply the reserves that are designed to support our budget. I hope we don't get in the position where we have to use them, but I wanted to be confident going into a draft budget position that even if we got no help from central government, and even if the pandemic situation remains severe, we would still be able to balance our budget for the duration of 21-22. And that's the position that we find ourselves in. I think it's actually a tribute to the hard work of the directorate and to Dawn in the finance and Sharon in the finance team to get us to a position where actually we can withstand such an enormous shock to our finances, but also fundamentally underlies the conversation we just had a second ago with Councillor Patel, that local government finances are in a deeply precarious position. We've seen, for example, a situation in Croydon on their second Section 114 notice. We don't want to get anywhere near that position. I think it's a tribute to our teams and the difficult decisions taken in the past that we aren't anywhere near that position. But we do know that this is a very serious situation, and we will continue to advocate with our colleagues across local government to get a proper settlement for local government in the future, along with fixed things like adult social care, which is so badly needed. So I think that's probably serves as an introduction.
Thank you, Adam. We're going to move on to political questions for Adam, and I'm going to use my chair's privilege to kick off. I just want to ask about the London living wage, and at our recent full council meeting, we passed a motion to pay all of our staff the London living wage, which is great. We also said that we would look into paying our contractors, in particular care workers, the London living wage. That is not reflected in our budget, and I was wondering, when is the first contract up for review, and what will our position be?
Great question, and London living wage is something I'm personally deeply passionate about. That's why I put forward the motion to the council meeting. So I think what we're doing, we've taken a series of steps over a couple of years now on the London living wage. One of the first steps clearly was to make sure our own staff are on the London living wage, and we need to be absolutely clear that that's the case for all our staff. And I think there's some pieces we still need to fix at the very edges, but that's absolutely baseline. The second thing we said was, let's make sure that in all our procurements, and this has been true for a couple of years now, that we are asking our contractors, are you paying the London living wage? And during that time, I haven't signed off on any procurements that have gone through the formal procurement process under that level. So all of them have been paying the London living wage. What we recognise is a couple of things. One is that we have some procurements coming up. So particularly if we, depending on what we do with our cleaning contracts, our SEN transport, our extra care contracts, there are a number of procurements that are coming up where we may face this question may be very material. And the second issue is that some of our social care contracts don't come up for procurement in quite the same way. So I think where I can be confident is that on the procurements coming up, we will, of course, be really, really explicit about getting contractors to tell us the additional cost of paying London Living Wage. And I'm confident that we will get to the point where we are able to go to London Living Wage on all those upcoming procurements, subject, of course, to some of these worst case scenarios not coming true. But that's the position that I'm determined to get to. On some of our longest standing social care contracts, I think there's a reality here that, you know, doing all of those contracts at London Living Wage levels would be a cost of several £1 million, which we haven't quite figured out how to do yet. But that is on my priority list, in my waterfall of, when you give me a little bit of extra money, where does it go? That is extremely high on the priority list.
Thank you. I'll go to Dean and then Gazanfa.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a two-part, really. One on the contract and the London Living Wage element, and I know that the Chair said when would these be coming up, but also within those current contracts, they have a variant clause within them. So perhaps we could look at the variant clause in regards to the London Living Wage and obviously the monies that we have. So you don't actually have to wait until those contracts come to an end. You have the variant clause within those contracts. On the on my actual question, and basically within the report, it says you've assumed that there's a 1.4 million adult social care grant recurring. And it doesn't seem to be clear from the spending review that this will be. How confident are you that it will be? Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Councillor. So on the 2 points, absolutely, you can put absolutely right around varying existing contracts. I mean, I think there is a huge amount of work that needs to take place in our social care team around commissioning in general. And, you know, a lot of that is about how do we drive, you know, quality through commissioning. And a big part of quality is making sure that the staff are paid a decent wage as well. So all that is in the same bucket. But absolutely, as soon as we get funding, that's one of the key things that we are pushing that funding into. So it's a really, really good point. In terms of the recurring position on our social care grant, I think there's a political reality here, which is that, you know, the idea that the government saying, well, actually, we think that now social care costs have come down would be, you know, so ludicrous that we think that it's become untenable for government to do that. We've seen that government announcing year on year, you know, additional one-off adult social care spending. If we didn't assume that would come back, our budget gap would be so extraordinary that, you know, it would put us into a sort of almost nonsense position. I think the government, you know, recognised that, and so happy councils to make some, you know, prudent assumptions on that. Having said that, we did anticipate, having put £1 billion extra into adult social care the last couple of years, we anticipated another £1 billion this year, especially at a time when adult social care has been hit so hard by COVID. And the government announced £1 billion. But when you looked into the fine print, they actually only gave us 300 million. And then they said the additional 700 million will come from council tax. So when the government made their announcements, what they've essentially said is we are expecting councils to raise council tax to fund adult social care because we refuse to do it. And so that's the position, that council tax is now effectively a national tax that the government is using to pay for social care bills because of their failures to fix adult social care funding for the long term.
Thanks, Adam. Just on the living wage issue, going back to it very quickly, can you, for our next Performance and Finance Subcommittee, can you provide us an update on where you get to, please?
Absolutely. Very happy to.
Thank you. Gazanfa and then Pritesh.
Thank you, Chair. Adam, just a question, because a lot of businesses will be going down or closing down, like Debenham and Harrow. We are not sure it will be there next year. And the business rates are going to be reduced drastically. I mean, are you expecting any compensation from the central government? If not, What do you think we're going to do? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ali. And you're actually right that the business rate base has been falling in Harrow for quite some time because of a number of reasons. Changing the nature of the economy, as you say, some of that may accelerate now, and also because of the government scheme to allow offices to be converted into flats, which has taken again away quite a lot of Harrow office space over quite a number of years. So we've expected our business rate base to fall over time. And where we get effectively compensated for that is that if we do end up having more housing, then there are some schemes available like the new homes bonus and of course the extra council tax we get from new homes, which means that all in all it sort of balances itself out a bit. So I think that where we expect the government to act is we expect the government to act to support businesses during such a difficult period, and to support the high street. And the government's, for example, way working with TfL at the moment has not been very helpful to facilitate really good investments into transport. So I think that's probably the position that we're at on business rates.
Pritesh.
Thank you. Adam, I'm surprised that, it's taken you 10 years almost, or your party 10 years to recognise, that the London living wage needs to go up. It's only when the government started to increase the minimum wage across the board that you guys jumped onto the bandwagon. So you need to understand that a bit more and give credit to the government to raise the standard a bit more. That's something that you guys always do, is to jump on the bandwagon. It's time that you sort of honestly and genuinely did these things as a matter of course, rather than picking the latest fad that's going around. Enough said on that. Chair, if I can move on to asking questions about the actual report, would that be appropriate right now, with your permission?
If they're technical questions, I'd rather we don't.
Okay, no problem. Carry on.
So
okay.
Let's just.
Can I maybe come back on that and then perhaps take your lead, Chair?
Go for it.
I just say, Councillor Patel, you've asked many very, very, very good and incisive questions tonight, but I'm afraid I can't take any lectures on the living wage from a party that voted against the national minimum wage, that has cut welfare for the last decade, and is threatening now to cut the poorest, the incomes of the 6 million poorest households in this country by £1,000 a year from April. I'm afraid until your party fixes some of those fundamental issues, then I will take absolutely no lectures from anyone who holds the Conservative banner on low pay. On that note, Chair, really appreciate your committee's indulgence, and I'll leave you in the good hands of our Finance Director on the budget.
Can I just check if any members have got any final political questions for Adam? Sorry, Adam, I know you were in a rush to go.
All right.
Anyone? Well, it's your lucky evening, Adam. Thank you for joining us. And see you soon. And Dawn, we will move on to technical questions. Okay. So members who has some questions. Pritesh.
Thank you very much, Chair. If I knew it was political question time, I would have had a few more planned up my sleeve. But anyway, my question is regarding the table 1 on page 5 of the document. Now, I noticed that, it's slightly political here, but there's a element there that it's because of central government, and my problem with that table is you only show the revenues highlighted for council tax and business rates that we receive. I mean, what other revenues have we received across those years from other sources? Surely there must be other revenues that we can put there against those figures and total it up and get a more accurate representation of the income.
I think we get a number of revenue streams throughout the year, but they're normally quite specific to specific areas of expenditure. So it's a little bit like what I was explaining before. We get grant money in that has to be spent on very specific areas. So, for example, troubled families, asylum seekers, so the money comes in and it has to go on a very specific set of expenditures that we incur. The reason why we show council tax and NDR in this table is just to demonstrate that of our budget that we have to, of our controllable budget that we have to fund, an element of that budget is funded by what used to be the revenue support grant, and then the rest of it is funded, you know, a big chunk of that is funded by council tax and NDR. And those are the grants that come in, and they support general expenditure. So whereas other grants come in very for specific things, those two main grant schemes fund general expenditure. And so that is why they are shown in the table, to show that actually just, you know, the very important issue that 78% of our budget now is being supported primarily by council tax, because we have lost because the revenue support grant was very generic. So it wasn't, for example, like troubled families where we will get X amount of grant money in, but we have a very specific criteria on which to spend that grant money, it goes out. So in theory, the impact on the budget is there is zero impact on our controllable budget. What this is to say is the rest of those services that we have to provide from our general budget, for which we don't get specific grant income in for, a big element that used to be supported by the revenue support grant, that has now gone, and actually therefore that is increasing the reliance on the other two generic streams of income that we get in terms of council tax and business rates. So you are right in saying that there are other grant income streams, but they are dedicated. They are very prescriptive in terms of how we have to spend that. So we get the money in, but we have to spend it very specifically, so it doesn't help. So those forms of income often don't help our general core services, such as the directorates that we have to those directorate services.
I don't necessarily agree with that, but you know, if that's the way things are presented, then that's fine. But I think it doesn't give you the most accurate picture of exactly what the council is receiving in terms of monies from other sources. Okay, moving on to the external funding position, which is, I believe it's on page 7. I don't think there's page 7. Harrow Council remains one of the lowest funded council boroughs nationally, locally, in London and nationally. Now, I'm just wondering, we've seen the same old figures for a number of years now. Where do these figures come from? And are you able to provide us with the stats that back up those figures?
Now, these figures, they were updated a couple of years ago, so they were updated for 1920. So these figures came from a piece of work that was done across London, and it was done by an external company, and it is based on the facts. So what it was looking at was how the formula that we have to fund council services, where we were in comparison to how much everybody else got. And what it showed is that when we showed up the divvying of the pot between all the local authorities, it is a fact that we are very low down the pecking order. Now what we found is when we did that analysis, there are some key areas that, for example, in Harrow, we just don't pick up funding for, and it's all part of the argument to support that the current needs analysis, so the current way that the government allocate out its funding, does not meet the needs of boroughs anymore. And that's why we were very much looking forward to the Fair Funding Review, which was meant to address this need. So those figures are factual figures. They are based on an analysis of the money that's come in, how it's allocated out, and actually where we stand in that funding ranking. So they're not those figures that I've made up. They are genuinely based on statistics. They were updated for 1920, and we could have them re-updated if we wanted to. But the reality is, our funding decision hasn't really fundamentally changed. There's not a sway of income that's come into the Harrow Council different to anybody else that would fundamentally affect those figures.
I mean, I had a look at a few of those reports written by the GLA and various agencies, including the National Statistics Office. And my recollection of the figures that were presented is quite different from this recollection or these figures, simply because, you know, some of the funding that we receive is based on affluency and deprivation within a borough. Harrow is one of the most affluent boroughs in London. You know, probably not the most affluent, but certainly amongst the top 11, I would say. It's a very affluent borough. Also, the deprivation index is very, very small compared to other London boroughs. And it's according to that we're receiving the funding. And I'm just surprised at these figures here. So I wouldn't mind some kind of understanding of where you got that from, and if I can have those background stats to back these up.
Could I just do a little bit of a further explanation on that, Chair? I think one of the challenges now with the funding formula is the way that the council receives its money doesn't meet the need of the borough. So what we're saying, so if I give you, and there's a bit of a disconnect because the funding formula is so old. So if I give you an example, so for example, we as a borough, there's 40 odd factors in terms of how you receive your funding as a local authority, and you sort of pick up points for if you meet that factor. So for example, one of the issues with Harrow is that we know that we are a borough of very small businesses, so we don't have many people, very small businesses, people on very low pay. The point in the factor that gives us our funding is if you are on benefits. What we have is we have a borough of low-paid people, low-paid residents, but they're not on benefits. So we don't attract the funding, but obviously residents being on low pay does come with areas that the councils needs to address. So we have the need there, but what we're not doing is we're not picking up the funding. So that's where the problem is in terms of the current funding formula. The argument is because it's so old, it doesn't meet the need. Now, the only thing that really changes on the funding formula is the population, but it's saying there's a disconnect between the two. So I can provide you with some further information, but it's just about saying it's that disconnect now that's happening because the formula hasn't been changed for so long.
I'd appreciate if you can provide me with some background information on that. I'd be interested to understand that. Thank you very much, Chair. I don't have any further questions on that.
Thank you. Do any other members have any questions? So in which case I have a couple, which I will ask. Dawn, can I ask about the 2 million in capital flexibilities, please, that's been put into the budget for 21-22? So firstly, do we have a list of the assets to be sold under the programme? Has work started on the sales, given the time it takes to get these over the line? And then the third question, which I don't actually expect you to know off the top of your head, but I will be incredibly impressed if you do. In total, what is the value of the capital flexibilities used by the council to date?
Okay, so in terms of the first question, well, if I answer the second question first, now we currently have about £1 million of capital receipts in hand that we can apply to those flexibilities. So and there will be a report coming to January Cabinet that has a list of asset disposals. So that gives us a little bit of a cushion that if some of those didn't all get through in a year, then we have the cushion of the capital receipts in hand that we can use so that we don't compromise the figure that we've got built in the budget. In terms of the value overall, we have used probably just under £10 million. I can confirm that in exact value, but it is a very small number. Because we do have this tool, and it's a tool that we can use, and it's a good tool because local government's been subject to huge transformation, but we don't get given funding for that. We haven't, we don't have that money. But we've also tried to be very measured in that it comes with specific criteria, so to make sure that we can include those criteria. And if we think of the two authorities that have struggled and have been in the press, Northampton and Croydon, two of the factors against them is they haven't really used this capital flexibilities in the spirit and the meeting the criteria they should do. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. And then the budget gap for 22-23 is almost 26 million.
Yeah.
That's I mean, it's a really large gap, and we're probably going to have extensive service changes to meet that gap. And we're probably going to need a full 13-week consultation. And in order to be able to get a meaningful consultation and ensure that the savings are in place by April 22, we're likely to need to start next summer, the summer of 21. So I guess, how far advanced are the council's plans for closing this 26 million gap?
I think it's a very, very good question. I think what I'm trying to recognise in the report is that gap is as it is at this point in time. And what will happen is when we get our indicative settlement this year's budget might slightly change. So the assumptions that we build into 2021 might slightly change, which will, we use less reserves, bring the gap down. It is also recognised that for 22-23, there are some things that we can build into the gap. So we've assumed a council tax increase, but there are things like on continuation of funding, etc., that we just genuinely don't know. It's all the issues that Adam was explaining earlier on, just the complete uncertainties. What we haven't got is we are now having to start this work now. I think it's been very difficult to start that planning until we get any form of certainty in terms of what the gap is, for all those reasons that Adam explained. But and that's why what I'm saying now is that basically from now, so we've got two key points coming forward. We've got the indicative settlement that will come in this week. Does that change our forecast position for next year, and then hence impact on the following year? We've got the final indicative settlement that will come in February, the final settlement which will come in February, which I suspect won't change the position because that tends to be what we get this week, just a bit of consultation on. There are a couple of things in the spending review that were announced that we just cannot quantify for budget purposes at the moment, which will change next year's and potentially the following year's budget. So that is primarily around the money that's coming out in terms of recovering council tax losses, because we don't know whether that's going to be a revenue account or collection fund issue, and the money that we're being given for council tax support. And the reason that I say, for example, they will affect next year's budget and the following is, for example, on council tax support, we have had to recognise in our budget that we have lost about £1.7 million because of the pandemic. A lot of people have gone on to council tax support, that erodes our base. The government announced in spending review that there is support for councils for that. What we don't know at the minute is we don't know any specific value for Harrow, and we actually don't know what the conditions are around that money. So I have to make a judgment. Do I build it in or don't I? Sometimes it's really difficult in our position to build stuff in and withdraw it out. I would hope that would benefit our budget for next year, hence bring the reserves we rely on down and hence make the following year a little bit better. So there's a few things that we know a little bit of, for moving chairs, it's going to happen. But you are quite right. We have got not every certainty, but at least we have a little bit of a better idea where we were in October when we brought the report before. We now have to really focus our energies on, this is a position that we're looking at going forward. What types of things can we do? And that's why I'm saying that we have to have those on paper before the summer for next year, because like you say, depending on what that is, we might have got some, we are due a spending review for 21. We might start by that point to start to get some inkling of what's going to happen in terms of our funding. If they're saying we're going to relook at spending review, Fed funding formula, we might get some ideas out in terms of what's going to happen that can help us out, inform our thinking. But you're quite right, by the summer we are going to have things on paper. How are we going to tackle it? And hence, what does that mean in terms of consultation, implementation, etc.?
Thank you, and I appreciate how difficult it is when you're constantly waiting on answers from government. It's not an easy position to be. Okay, if there aren't any more questions from members, we can move on to the next report, the final report, which is the draft capital programme. So Dawn, over to you.
And if it's okay with yourself, Chair, I'm gonna ask Sharon to go through this because Sharon does more of the work on capital, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. That's fine.
So Sharon, can you?
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks. Evening, councillors. I've just realised my first mistake is I haven't put page numbers on this report, so that makes it a bit difficult to go through. And I did that purposely, so I assumed it would be sequentially numbered, but never mind. Okay, so this is the annual draft capital programme report. So it comes up in December every year to Cabinet, and then the final report will go to Cabinet in February. So it's the annual report. What's slightly different about it this year is that what we've done is we've asked all services to carry out a full review of the capital programme and actually include the current financial year in that review, which is 2021. We did that for a couple of reasons, really. Obviously, we've had COVID impact, and a lot of services were just not operating for 3 to 4 months. So highways is a good example where they weren't able to go out and spend the money. And I think we all recognise that we do have significant slippage every year. So we've built in the fact that this, for the first time, services were able to look at 2021 and build that in as part of their review of the capital programme. So this capital programme goes from 2021, which is the current financial year, and it goes up to 23-24, which is the additional financial year. So basically, the service were asked to do that. I mean, I suppose the net impact when you look at the capital programme report, there's table 3 in the report, which is let me see the paragraph number. Probably going to be more helpful. So yeah, paragraph 15 in the report. So table 3 there.
What's the page, Sharon?
There isn't a page number, unfortunately, because as I've unwittingly taken the page numbers off of the reports, but it's paragraph 15, and it's the first report on the agenda. Actually, it's before the budget report. Doesn't make it very easy for you to find it, I know.
I think if you look on the PDF thing, it's page 5, I think, or something near there. Table 3.
Yeah. Oh, page 8 actually. Try page 8. This is coming up for me. I don't know if that's helpful. It's paragraph 15. So is it all right if I carry on? I'm still. Do I carry on?
Yeah, please. Yeah, it is. It is.
Find it.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, that's basically the table sets out the main changes to the capital programme. So, what we're showing there is, if you look at the bottom, we're saying that actually there's a net reduction of 117 million, which is a really, really large number to the capital programme. But what I've tried to do there is attempt to show you that actually that takes into account a lot of the items that we've talked about, such as the investment properties that have come out, that's 94 million, and then a number of other sort of capital programme projects like Vernon Lodge, vehicle acquisitions and the probation centre. All of those items have come out, but if you look at the first number in that table, the 10.382 million, that's the net addition, if you like, to the capital programme. And what I've done is I've set all of that out in Appendix 2. So Appendix 2 to the report actually shows you what we've actually added in, or the additions to the capital programme. So it's slightly confusing to show a figure of 117 million in itself, because that shows all these items that have come out. So I think Appendix 2 is a good, if you look at that, that shows you what's actually gone into the programme. And just to go further down, Table 4, what that does, that sets out the additional cost of those items at Appendix 2. So what you can see is that there's an additional cost of £694,000 as a result of us adding basically 10.4 million into the programme. And the report also sets out the use of Borough Seal, which is quite an important funding source for us now. So part of the capital programme is funded by Borough Seal, 10.7 million, so quite a large amount. But yeah, so so we've taken the opportunity to review 2021, and if hopefully that will mean that we don't have as much slippage. I'm not saying we won't have any slippage, because things can still change. We did this and we've gone into another lockdown, and so we don't know what the impacts of that are. Services have done their best to try and give us a reasonable figure for 2021. So I'm hoping that we won't have as large a slippage as we've had in the past. We are going to be removing a lot of the programmes where we've not been able to progress with them. And I will say that those programmes that we've removed, they've either been cost neutral, or we have had a saving in for them. So that doesn't actually, so we've taken them out, but it doesn't save us money, because they went in the first place on a cost neutral basis. So it doesn't save us money on capital financing. So I'll stop wittering there and ask if there's any questions.
Thanks, Sharon. That was a really useful overview. Pritesh, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sharon, for that update. I just had a quick question regarding the slippages. I'm just wondering, you know, in the forecast Capital 2 monitoring report, table 11, there's mentioned that there's a total slippage in the capital program of approximately 169k. Now, you mentioned slippage in this particular program. Have we taken into consideration any of that slippage? I note that you've taken consideration of the 94 million from the resources area, but what about the other figures that are mentioned in that particular forecast? Have they been taken into consideration?
Well, in the quarter 2 monitoring, they are reported solely as they are currently in the capital programme. What's going to happen when we do quarter 3 that goes to cabinet in February? We will have adjusted all the budgets so that all those items. So, for example, the investment properties, all those budgets will be removed from the programme. But we didn't want to do it for the monitoring. It's really confusing to show it for the monitoring. So the capital programme report, as in draft, we'll take those out. When we go to quarter 3, we'll adjust those budgets. So that's what I was saying. Hopefully, when we get to quarter 3, the slippage figures will be a lot reduced from what they are at the moment. I'm not saying it will eradicate it completely though, because there's always things always change a bit, but it should be a lot better than it normally is.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much. I have another question, if I can, on that. It's regarding, I mean, you mentioned it in section 10 there, just under the main table 2, that, you've got the external funding of 80.845 million to facilitate that net capital program, and of which 151 million is to be financed from borrowing. Now, what is our current position on borrowing for the council, and which schemes will be sort of as a result of that borrowing? Which schemes will that borrowing go towards, in fact?
Sorry, did you want to?
Yeah, so I'm on mute. I charge everybody £10 a fine if we keep on mute. I've had to pay £10 now. In terms of the council's, I'll start answering this. So in terms of the council's overall borrowing, we are currently at, I think it's £410 million. So we have intentionally not tried to borrow this year, because of to try and really make a saving on our capital financing charges in the current financial year, to preserve our reserves, to enable us to reserves that we're going to use, not use, and carry forward to help us out next year. Now we have a trigger point, so we monitor the cash flow, the money in the bank, very carefully, and we have a trigger point. If our balances fall between £30 million, we will look to borrow. Now, and most of that borrowing is for the capital programme. I am not at the moment, and I hate saying things like this because I will be held to account, but at the moment I am not envisioning that the council will take on any further borrowing this year. So we're not intending to take on any further borrowing to make sure that we don't incur any capital financing charges that are not necessary. I think what is very difficult is, and also one of the things that Sharon and I have to do, is in the spending review, there were announcements made about the Public Works Loans Board rates and their rates going down. Sharon and I have still yet to sort of work that through the budget, and we'll do that in preparation for final budget. What we don't do is we don't, when we borrow our funding, we don't borrow for specific schemes. We have what's called a capital financing requirement. So we look at our borrowing requirements to fund primarily the capital programme, and we look at what that is. We look at what sources of income we're going to get in for grants. We look at the minimum revenue provision that we set aside because we offset that against the borrowing, and we say this is the money that we are potentially going to have to borrow to fund the overall programme. So what I can't say is scheme 1, 7, 8 and 9 we are going to borrow for, and the other schemes we won't. We look at it as a totality.
Okay, but so in essence, what you're saying is that 151 million will be covered in terms of the borrowing that we've already got. Is that the case?
No, it won't be covered in terms of what it won't be covered in terms of the borrowing that we've already got. What we will do is we will, at the moment, the money at the moment, the money in the capital programme, we keep it as a track as to how much money we need to borrow. So, for example, I'll give you an example, just as a practical example. We've got in our bank account at the moment some money that is due to go back to government. For they gave us X amount for business rate, we paid out X amount. So we may as well use that money in our bank account without borrowing. So when we're trying to work out our borrow, because we might as well until we have to pay that money back. When we get some grants paid in advance, so sometimes we get some of the business rate relief paid in advance, we will use that money before we borrow money, just as a cash flow issue. So it's quite, I'm just trying to demonstrate there's a really big consideration that goes on as to how much we end up borrowing on the bottom line.
Thank you very much, Dawn. That was all I had. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, great. Any further questions from any members? No? In which case, I think we have come to the end of the agenda. So a big thank you to Dawn and Sharon for attending and all your comprehensive answers this evening. I hope everyone has a very safe and healthy and happy Christmas, and see you all at the next committee in the new year.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much. Everyone, take care. Bye-bye.
Happy New Year.
And yourselves, guys. Enjoy.
Bye-bye.
Bye.